You. All right, so going through this chapter in a sort of a lesson title, essentially being "Living for God's Will." So we've gone through Peter talking about being called to holiness through Christ, a living hope in Christ, submission in our relationships. We've talked about suffering in our righteousness, and now continuing a little bit on the path of suffering and things that we have to experience in the world, but applying that today by trying to live a Christ-like life. And that is honestly very difficult, I think, for just about everybody. Would say it's not incredibly easy to be in the world but not of the world, right? Very, very hard, I think, for a lot of us because we're all sinners. And we all have our shortfalls. And many of us are very good at one thing but maybe not the other. I was having a conversation with Scott this afternoon, and we were talking a lot about how we were talking about high schoolers and the youth growing up and different things like that. And we were talking about how there's a lot of positives whenever we are open with that age group about the things that we've struggled with, right? But even for us, a lot of times we'll look at people who are older than us or maybe seemingly wiser than us, and we'll be like, oh, well, they got it all figured out. And then to figure out their sins or the things that they go through, it is a little bit comforting to us to know, not that we want people to suffer, right? But it's a little bit comforting, I think, to me, to know, man, this person is going through maybe what I'm going through or did at one point in their life, and when I feel alone or whatever it might be. And we can really apply a lot of this from Christ's love for us because he suffered the worst of it, right? And I was talking a little bit too after class about, we had a lot of engagement first 2 weeks. Last week, I think sometimes when we talk about suffering, right, and suffering for righteousness or trying to live in God's will, we're trying to be humble, right? We don't want to speak out like, hey, this is something that I accomplished. But I do think it is good to open up about that stuff. Don't feel like that you're bragging on yourself, right? If there's something that you've done that was difficult, that you overcame, right? Because I think a lot of times that is good for us to hear. So like I said, we're going to try to get through the whole chapter in 1 Peter chapter 4, if you'll turn there for me. And I want to start with verses 1 and 2. So whoever has that, read loud and proud for me, just verses 1 and 2. All right, thank you. So again, we talked a lot about godly living in the last chapter, talking about, Noah and Jesus and how Noah was saved by the water and how Jesus has now given us the water of life in baptism to save ourselves. This sort of continues that. And arm yourself with the same purpose because the one who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. Jesus conquered sin for us, right? And we are unable to do that. And I think about it like this. We have to, and it's very difficult to do this, but the application I looked at it as is to stop allowing worldly desires and lust to control us. We put things in front of God all the time. Like right now, one thing that I'm really going through in my life that is getting harder is as my kids are getting older, it's like, oh, we have ball practice on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and games on Sunday. And I have at least one child who is really taken up to this sport. And he's got like 3 games on Wednesday. And it's like we can go to half of it. Maybe we'll be a little late, you know. And that's a decision that my wife and I are having to make, is what do we do about this thing that they really love, right, and are actually good at, but how do I teach them what to prioritize? So I wanted to ask, what does it mean to live for the will of God rather than for human desires? Either in your opinion or just like a blanket. What does that mean to you? You need me to speak up? Okay. What does it mean to live for the will of God rather than human desires? Can you hear me? Hear me? All right. I'm going to do what I do in my high school class, just start picking people out. Yes. You did raise your hand, yes. Yeah, to do the things that are pleasing to God, except for pleasing to self. We've discussed this a little bit throughout this class about how sometimes it is tough to see the reward when the reward is only that God is happy, right? Because he's not patting us on the head or giving us a trophy. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, I mean that humble nature too, right? And I mean, and you know, we have whole sections of Christianity that worships her for that, right? You know, but that's not. She didn't ask for that, or even want that, right? I think that's a very good example. The example was, you know, Mary being presented to being the mother of Jesus. I mean, that is a big deal, and she lived for the will of God, to do her role, which was to raise this child until he could become a man, and, you know, like we saw, push him into his first miracle even. You know, that was a big deal. Yes, Scott. Yeah, I think that is a lot of it is, what do you prioritize? What do you present yourself? And that's just one example that I think a lot of parents have to go through or whatever. And different people make different decisions on different things like that, and that's okay. That one was just mine, right? So, but I appreciate that. Let's move forward, all right? So this is 1 Peter 4. Let's go 3 through 6. Somebody loudly read for me verses 3 through 6. Thank you. All right, so for this section, I had really written down to, now he's shifting into leaving our old ways behind. And there is a list here of things that Peter is bringing up. This is something that he's obviously noticed among Christians. This is not everything, obviously, but he says that the time is past. It's sufficient for you to have carried out the desires of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of indecent behavior. So again, this is a not necessarily, hey, here's a list of just bad things, right? This isn't like the Levitical law. We're looking at it like, if it's not one of these things, we're fine, right? He's talking about, here are some things that you or we have struggled with that are sin, and we need to change our life. Very often, there's sort of an affirming behavior where I want to do this thing, so we're gonna try to find a way to do it and kind of like walk that line of whether or not it's a sin or not. There is a lot of conversation that happens around that. So one of the I had put down to leave our old patterns behind. So again, it's not just not doing these things, but obviously, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, idolatries, right? Again, we're talking about putting things in front of God, okay? Because if we're having much wine and becoming drunk, right, and getting to that point, we are putting that desire in front of God's will, as Ms. Royce brought up earlier, right? That is what we're putting in front of. So my question to everybody here is, what are some things that can compete with God's will in our lives? Other than, what are some things that compete with God's will in our lives? Yes. Yeah. Yep. Stood on business, right? That's a great example because your job is one of these things, right? You made the decision that I'm going to do this thing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would assume if you had a boss or someone that was like, no, you have to do this, you would likely, maybe not right away because you need to make money, but maybe search for some other employment or something else, right? At another time. Because you made that decision that you were not going to work on Sunday, right? Now, there are other instances we understand that people have, right? That's a very good one. Your job can get in our way. I think that was a good example, but another one that I would bring up in terms of job is just money in general, right? I'm doing this job and working on Sundays and missing church and doing this because if I do the grind, a lot of the young guys in here will know this. You're doing the grind, right? That's what you're in right now. You're, as Keith will say, you're digging the hole, right? That's what you're doing right now, right? But people take that way too far because it's, oh man, if I do this extra on Sunday, I'll make more money, right? It's not just about the log and the hours, which I think that's a good example, but it's also about if I put in the grind on Sunday. I hear this all the time. I work in insurance. A lot of these guys that do like big life insurance sales, they used to say all the time, you work on Sundays? You do Sundays? You do call centers on Sundays? You make your 20 calls on Sundays? You know what I mean? Like, it's not worth it, right? Yes. No. Yes, I did. Yeah, I saw your hand up. Mhm. Yeah, indecent behavior, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and wanton idolatries is what is mentioned. Yeah. Mhm. Right. What is the purpose? What is the goal? Right? What are we doing here? I think is a lot of times the question, right? So like if you're going somewhere, right, and you and this happens a lot when you're younger. When you're older, you know who to avoid and what boundaries to set. Sometimes, not all the time, but I know like in college and different things like that, or when you're out when you're younger, there are people who will do that. They will say, well, you're not going to have alcohol at at like just any type of social gathering or a wedding or whatever. Like, how do you even have fun, right? Like I used to meet people all the time that would one time at my house that I lived in college, and Jake lived with me, so he can attest to this. We had a big bonfire in our backyard. Someone called the fire marshal. The fire marshal came by because they were so ready to catch this drunken party, right? And when I was like, hey, man, it's a bunch of people from church. There's no alcohol here. They looked at me and they were like, oh, yeah, all right, buddy. And they showed up, and there was probably 70 people in my backyard, all, people from Western Kentucky, the people who had moved in from Florida College. And the fire marshal was like, there's really no alcohol at this party, and there's like 70 people here. What's going on, right? Like, so it's shocking to people, right? To hear, I bring that up to say, it's like literally shocking to people to hear stuff like that. You know what I mean? But that's the point, right? What is the point? The point of us having that party in college was we were coming back to school. It was first semester. We were getting our Christian friends together and having a good time. That was the point, right? A lot of times the world, they can't see that. The point will be like, why am I getting together if I can't have a drink, And to your point, most of the time, when you go to those things, if you have one, you're going to have another. And it's just inevitable, right? I agree with that. Anything else? Yes. Yep. Yep. I agree. I had a Bible study once in college that I thought was really good. That there was a guy there that asked a question one time. We were talking about a lot of these same concepts, right? And he asked a question to me that has stuck with me, and I try to live by it from time to time, but it's not what is the line of sin, right? How many cuss words can we hear in a movie, or what euphemism can we use, or how, again, like you had said, how many drinks can I have? But it's what is holy, right? To ask that question. I know just about everybody's parent in here, I know mine did, they would say, if Jesus was in the car with you, would you say that word, right? Same concept, like I said. Not trying to oversimplify it, but it's true in a lot of ways, right? All right. How can Christians respond when friends or family don't understand the changes that Christ has made in their lives? I think this might be very specific to people who didn't necessarily grow up in the church or maybe left and came back, but I did want to ask that, if anybody's willing to share, that how can we respond to friends and family who don't understand changes that we've made in our lives? So again, like a lot of times, if you're in college or whatever, and you used to be the partier and now you're not, they might not understand that. Hey, why do you not do this thing anymore, right? I was just wondering if anybody had any thought there, or if anybody wanted to share an experience. Yep. I think, and this is not true of everyone, right? I know a lot of people would be like, well, no, but a lot of people that I meet in my life, you know, when you ask them, like, hey, do you have any friends left from high school? They'll be like, no, not really. I know that's not true of everybody, right? But a lot of times they'll be like, no, not really, I don't. And part of the reason for that is because the people that we knew that we didn't go to church with or lived a certain life or knew us as a certain way, they didn't really understand the change that we made, right? And so then, not that you were like, hey, you're not my friend anymore, but maybe you just drifted away, and now you're mid-30s, 40, 50, and you're like, I'm not friends with you anymore. And it is because the people that we surround ourselves with are the ones that want us to go to heaven, right? And again, no, that's not true for everybody. Somebody's going to be like, I still meet up with my high school buddies all the time. I get it. But that's a unique, I think, in a lot of ways. I wanted to ask that. So, all right, moving on. All right, let's do verses 7 through 11. Still in chapter 4, 7 through 11. All right, thank you. All right, so this one I put living with the end in mind, to be self-controlled, prayerful, loving, hospitable. We're to use our gifts, and with those gifts to glorify God. And that is a change in how you serve others. I think is sort of what I had taken from that. But specifically, you know, it says, be hospitable to one another without complaint. Like a lot of people here would say, yeah, I want to be hospitable. But what does that mean? What? You gotta clean. Okay, yeah. Like I gotta get up and do my duty to my own self, right? A little bit without complaining. Yeah. What else? What does it mean to be hospitable without complaint? Do you speak Greek? Is that what's going on here? Yeah. How often do you think people choose where they go to church based on like, hey, I just moved to Louisville and I want to choose where I'm going to church? And how often do you think people are like, I didn't really like that one because no one talked to me? I'm sure all of us have heard that, right? And it probably hurts our feelings if we hear it like, yeah, I came to Eastland and I didn't go to Eastland because no one said a word to me. They seemed like a big clique. I'm sure people have said that. We all know that's not true. But I'm sure there have been people who have visited. Maybe it was an off day for everybody, and that sort of became their impression, right? So I think, Eric, I think that's a good point to bring up. To be hospitable without complaint, yeah, like you said, is not just how many people are you inviting over to your house, right? But that's also a good thing to do. If you're not doing that at all, maybe that is something that it's like, well, maybe I don't want to do it. Maybe I should get out of my comfort zone, right? But I also think it's getting to know people. We do joke around a little bit in this church about how we've gotten so big that it's like left-siders versus right-siders, right? All the people in the middle got to hold us in, right? And I think a little bit of that is because church is over, everybody over here kind of congregates together, everybody over here sort of maybe congregates together. But at times, I do find myself, because I sit right there a lot of times, I don't see the people that are over here as much. And that is on me, right? But I should be willing to do that, to learn more about the people that I don't see as much. And that way in the world as well, right? Taking an interest in others. I talk a lot. I don't listen as well as I want to. And I'm always fascinated by people who are really, really good listeners. I want to be that way, right? I wish I was better at that. And I find it fascinating. Sometimes I will literally watch some people here have conversations with other people and I will literally think to myself, like, man, I want to be able to talk to other people that way, right? Like, I have known this guy for 10 years at this point. I've never asked him that question. Why? Right? So being hospitable without complaint is, I think a lot of it is just get out of your comfort zone. Don't just sit around doing nothing. You're not talking to people. You don't know the people that you're sitting next to, right? We're all here together, right? We have to live in this world and we all go to work and we're surrounded by people that all they want to do is talk about whatever, and then we end up sinning, right? But when we're here, everybody just wants everybody to go to heaven, right? So, yeah, yes. Yeah. Where this is the dumb it down class. Yeah. Yes. Well, there you go. First time for everything. And you got to know somebody, right? And you hopefully shined a light on where you worship and what you do. And that maybe if you got a number, something, conversation can continue, right? Yeah. Also, talking about the using your gifts, right? Not bearing your talents, same kind of concept. A lot of people during this time period were speaking in tongues and performing miracles and being able to use the gift of the Holy Spirit in a different way than we do now. But we are to employ our gifts in serving one another as good stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. And it just, that's, if we have something that we're great at, use it for your spiritual life, right? Unlock what you're great at and use it for the people here and the church, and not just, if you're great at something that's made you successful in business, that thing that is great can be successful in a spiritual setting as well, right? Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. Do not grow weary in doing good. What is it? Is in due season we will reap, like we will reap what we sow, right? That's what we do. Yeah. Because that can be tiring, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yep. Mhm. Yeah. Yep. Right. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you saying that, because in going through each of these, I try to make a lot of comparisons to our lives and stuff, and I really appreciate you bringing it back to the context of the actual scripture, because you're right. This is, like, everything that you said is completely right, and I think many times we think, oh, we live in the worst of the worst, but we really don't in terms of the way that they suffered. But even to your same point, in as tough a times as we do live now, using the gifts that we have for Christ and for good will help us get out of that, right? And so, moving forward in terms of that almost positive suffering, as you brought up, we'll get into verses 12 through 16. And so it says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though something strange were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that at the revelation of his glory you may also rejoice and be overjoyed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because of the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or thief or evildoer or troublesome meddler, but if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but as to glorify God in his name. This is actually the second time that he has said this in the last 2 chapters, right? To not be ashamed of glorifying God in his name, right? We are not to break the law and be evildoers as a thief and a murderer, but if we got to spread the word of Christ when people don't want us to, or maybe it is illegal, we got to do that, right? And my question there was, why does Peter tell Christians to not be surprised by suffering? Why should we not be surprised that we will suffer? Yeah. Right. Yep. But I'd put, yeah, I'd put down, am I suffering for the right reason? Kind of goes along with what you said. So, why is it important to distinguish between suffering because of righteousness and suffering because of our bad choices? Why is that important for us to be able to distinguish? Yes. Yeah. A lot of times in our society, we live in a big, like, yeah, but type society, right? Like, I I go through this or whatever, but it's no big deal because I've got control over it or whatever it might be, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's punishing you now in terms of like stress or anxiety or things like of the like, right? But it comes with a positive outcome. Whereas if you make a poor choice, it actually can be the opposite, right? Like we can steal money and have money, and then the cops find out, now we're in jail, right? We can we can do things that are wrong, and that will come with sometimes a reward now, right? And then we suffer a consequence later. Maybe we don't suffer the consequence in life at all, right? But suffering for the right reason, yes, right. Absolutely. It's, and a lot of people in this world, they're not even bad people, right? A lot of people are great people. But we continue to have to make choices for God regardless. Yes. Yep. Yep. Right. We can turn anything into selfishness, even suffering. Like, look at all the things I've given up to be a great person, right? So it is about the focus of glorifying God. Absolutely. Totally agree. Thank you. All right. So to finish us out, verses 17 through 19, for it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who did not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God are to entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. So, this is it's kind of a culmination of a lot of things that we've discussed. It's hard to think about sometimes, right? The people in my life that do not do the right thing in the eyes of God are going to be judged accordingly. Not by me, right? But by the Creator. But those of us who suffer to the will of God, we entrust our souls, as Jim just put out, to that Creator. And then He gives us the reward, which is His house. All right, thank you.